Monday, November 2nd, 2015 to order. First item on the agenda would be open council discussion. Do we have any items for open discussion? Councilor Urfenbach?
Thank you. I'm not quite unpacked, but I just wanted to kind of scrambling. Thank you. I just wanted to share something that was interesting to me today. As you know, I serve at the pleasure of, I guess the mayor appoints the Homeless Advisory Board, but I'm on the Homeless Advisory Board on behalf of the city. We met today, and one of the things that was part of the reporting was that by giving free passes, but when the council said free bus passes for veterans, that then opened up another 6,000 free bus rides for people in need in this community. I thought that was really an important number for us to understand, that we give about 40,000 passes per year through the Pass It On program that is distributed by Stacy Teason from the Homeless Advisory Board. And she said 6,000 of those passes were going to veterans, and now they're riding for free. And those 6,000 passes, and remember, it's just for one ride. So it's like I get on a bus here and then I transfer to go someplace else. That's 2 rides, but still big numbers. So I just thought it was very cool that we should all hear that. So thank you.
Any comments on that or any other items for open discussion? Councilor Karski.
2 things. First of all, happy birthday to Councilman Staggers. You're looking awfully patriotic today, Councilor.
Oh, well, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
We'll have some later.
And then the other thing is last week, representatives from St. Joseph, Missouri were in town, members of their city council, their mayor, their chamber of commerce, economic development, and so on. And I was asked to serve on a panel, just kind of a roundtable discussion panel, and just kind of an interchange of ideas. It was, I think, very beneficial. Billings, Montana came to Sioux Falls about a year ago for the same thing. Why are they coming here? Because Sioux Falls is recognized, quite frankly, not only in the upper Midwest, but nationally as Chamber's tagline, a good thing going. We truly do, and people want to figure out what are we doing and how are we doing it, talking about the collaboration between city government and enterprise, private enterprise. So it was a very interesting and informative time. Appreciate the opportunity to do it.
Thank you. Councilor Rolfing.
I should also mention that we're working, I don't know whether I've done this before or not, but if I mentioned that we're working with Rapid City and the Rapid City Council to get together and talk about different areas that confront both of us, so that we can maybe come up with some solutions, look at what they're doing, they can look at what we're doing, et cetera. And that should be interesting also. That'll be upcoming.
Yes, I have one item. This morning I had the privilege to do a ride-along with our new ambulance provider. I spent 5 hours in the ambulance with them and covered a few calls and got to have a real nice discussion with the crew and how they operate and everything. I found nothing to complain about. I think they're doing a really good job. There was one small thing that I do plan on bringing to the REMSA group and their management, and that is their GPS or GIS that they use to find their way around the city. A lot of these employees are newer to the city, and it was pretty much the first call that made me think about the issue that happened a few weeks ago out at Harmadon Park also, where they had some problems finding the location. And this one, they didn't have a problem finding the location, but where they were at, I mentioned it after we were completely done, that there was a much shorter route that they could have taken to that call. And then they showed me their GPS, and I think it's something that we could definitely have a discussion on. I don't think they're running the same thing that our fire run, so I think that's just something that needs to be brought up and encouraged maybe to take a look at. I'm not saying that it's a negative, but it is something that just sort of was pointed out to me. Councilor Erickson.
I haven't had the opportunity yet with scheduling to do the ride-along, but I know he did offer that to us. But I have had several conversations, and one of the conversations that in regards to the Harmadon area was to make sure that the training for the new and existing people, how do you quickly access the Premier Center? How do you quickly access certain parks or areas? And it's so important for them to know how to get to the best route. And so that's an area that they're going to implement in some additional training. We talked also about maybe the perception of how they're stationed, and it's different for our community to see them stationed in a parking lot of a gas station or a bank or whatever, and just kind of some of the comments received through that. And so we've talked about that as well, and so that's part of the conversation. And really, it's about educating the public on how much faster they can get to those calls and how much quicker they can respond at a time of need. And so it's important for the community to understand why they are just parked around town, that it's really a benefit for us as citizens to have that access that much quicker. I was at a store where somebody, literally, I felt like they collapsed and they were walking in already. It was that fast for them to get to that call. And it was pretty impressive how quick that they were there to respond and work together. And so definitely a learning process as a new company comes to town, but they certainly are receptive to any suggestions if people have those as well. So I just wanted to share that as well.
Councilor Kiley?
Yesterday marked the beginning of, at least for me anyway, No Shave November. And No Shave November is actually an event to raise cancer awareness and also to raise funding for cancer research and for prevention and education. And we're actually going to have a proclamation this evening marking November as Pancreatic Cancer Awareness Month. It's also Lung Cancer Awareness Month. I've lost both parents to cancer and a good friend to pancreatic cancer. So I would invite my colleagues and everybody else to look into it. If you're not willing to participate, you can certainly contribute. So speak with me if you have any interest. And I'll get shaggier as the days get longer.
And is that no haircut November too? Maybe yourself, Councilor Rolfing, and Stagger.
You'll never know with me, but
I figured 4 of us could probably have a little contest this month. But yeah.
The ladies can participate as well too. Go on online. No Shave November. Our city clerk likes that one too.
Back to Councilor Erickson's last statement too. My last ride, the positioning that they had put us, we were 8 blocks away from the very next call. And when we got there, the fireman actually looked at him and said, "You guys got here fast. Where were you at?" You know, so it was nice to hear that and that interaction between the fire and the ambulance service and the discussions that we had, you know, working together and using similar equipment and things like that. I'm really becoming more and more hoping that some of the changes will be for the betterment of our community, and I think we've got a really good group of people between our fire and our EMS to get it done. So thank you. Any other items for open discussion? Okay, being none seen, we will move to our presentations, or presentation today. The 2015 International Code adoptions, including the Building Code, Residential Code, Existing Building Code, Mechanical Code, Fuel Gas Code, Property Maintenance Code, and we will have Ron Bells leading off.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Yep, it's a 3-year code cycle. The I codes are published through the International Code Council. It's a nonprofit organization that goes through the government consensus process for bringing the codes up to date in a 3-year code change cycle. So what we're looking at is adoption of 6 codes. Later this year, the Uniform Plumbing Code will be put out by the state, the 2015, but we have to wait until the state does that, so there'll be one more code coming later in the year. With that, there's a lot to go over, and if you have any questions on any issues or whatever, please let me know, because sometimes I tend to ramble on as far as these issues. We're going to start with the International Residential Code. The International Residential Code is a 1- and 2-family dwelling code. For lack of a better term, it's a home builder's code. It's has everything how to prescriptively build a house. It includes not only general construction, but mechanical, electrical, plumbing systems, which we amend out because we got state requirements with the plumbing code and electrical code. But this is, this deals with 1- and 2-family dwellings or townhouses, not more than 3 stories in height, and has its own independent exit system. Anything outside of the scope of the International Residential Code is covered by the building code, a commercial code. With this, during the process of the code adoption, ICC does put out significant changes. These are all the significant changes that are in the 2015 IRC. And what we have done for years is that we've met with the Home Builders Association, a specific group, a committee called the Building Codes Committee. And I would suspect that we met probably 5 or 6 times and literally went through all the code changes to get their input as to what the code changes are about, and to also get their input as to whether it may be necessary to deal with any local amendments. Keep in mind that we've got the ability by state law to amend the codes to our local standards. So what you will see when you see the ordinances is an ordinance that simply deals with the way that ordinances are, and then there's going to be another document that's out there that actually makes changes to the code so people can see what that is, and that's going to be overstruck and underscored with a commentary as to what all these code changes are all about. But with that, a couple of items that came up with significant changes is that when the 2012 code came out, there was the IRC at the national level didn't keep up with the ASCE 7 standards for wind load requirements. The building code adopted the most current wind load design standards, which is 150 miles an hour, 3-second gust criteria. The 2012 code did not. Now the 2015 code is finally caught up with the most up-to-date civil engineering standards. So that is one change that's right at the very beginning, that it really doesn't affect the home builders because they prescriptively build, but if the geometry of the structure lends itself to an engineering design analysis, now an engineer would be using the most up-to-date wind standards and so forth. Carbon monoxide detectors. We have required carbon monoxide detectors in new houses since the I codes came out, but we've never required CO detectors for remodels, renovations, additions, because the language that was in the codes previously required it on any permit that you take out. Like if you reshingled your roof, you'd have to put a CO detector in. And we don't go inside of houses on an exterior type of inspection. So we simply chose to amend that out cycle after cycle. Well, the 2015 code finally got it right to say that if you renovate or remodel your house, create a bedroom where we always require smoke detectors, we will, as long as we have an inspection on the inside of the house, or if you create a bedroom, then now there will be a requirement for not only smoke detectors, but combination carbon monoxide and smoke detectors. Egress windows, there's a nice little change with this that if you were to, anytime that you put in a new bedroom, you need to have an egress window in a non-sprinklered structure. And the egress window provisions have been tweaked over the years from cycle to cycle, but there was a requirement that if you were to finish a room, if you were to put a habitable room in your basement, you would have to have an egress window. Well, at the national level, they got rid of that, which is quite helpful. Sometimes we've had a hard justification to tell a homeowner that just because you're putting in a habitable room, you have to have an egress window, but you always need the capability to get directly to the outside from a sleeping room. So what this will do is if somebody does finish off their house without a bedroom in there, there won't be a requirement for an egress window. And this really affects a lot of the older house stock. Any new houses any basements are putting egress windows in. We've been doing that for the last 20 years. There's the guard height within this. This is an example of what happens at the national level. Sometimes they make a code change, and the next code change cycle, they take it out. It's what I call a yo-yo effect. In the 2012 code, there was a requirement that if you had a deck and you have a fixed seat that a child could stand on, that guardrail, which is 36 inches high, has to go from the fixed seat up, not just the floor. Well, it was in the 12, it was taken out of the 15. And I don't know that we really saw that many fixed seats and decks where it really became an issue, but that was just a specific requirement. Floor joist spans, American Lumber Standards Committee has made modifications to their stress levels for floor joists. Southern pine has decreased span length, hemp fir and Douglas fir has increased, so we got to change our span tables, and it's typically a matter of inches, but it's something that happens at the national level. And there will be a lot more deck provisions. They really expanded the allowable spans for simple floor joist spans or where you have a cantilever. There's also another table for beams that we've never had before, and it's always a guessing game other than doing a little engineering equation just to figure out beams, but they've really helped, I think, as far as being more specific and prescriptive about deck requirements. With townhouse separations, there's a lot of changes that they did with townhouse separations, but at the national level, you have to understand that there's a requirement for sprinkling everything, which we don't do here in South Dakota. And what they did is they dropped the fire rating between townhomes from 2 hour down to 1 hour, then said that you couldn't have anything in the wall, whether it's plumbing or mechanical or whatever, and that you could also don't have to have structural independence, but that's based on a sprinkler being in the house. We don't have that here, so we're making some local modifications to say that yes, we still need the structural independence of that firewall between the buildings. And yes, we will allow plumbing penetrations because anytime you penetrate a firewall, there's a intermittent fire stopping system that maintains the integrity that's used in commercial structures all over the place. So that's an amendment that we needed just to stay current with how we do it here as compared to what we do at the national level. The next one is fire protection of floors. And this is where we came up with an impasse with the Home Builders Association. And we've got Cully Liebert here that would like to have a few words on the issue, and also we got Dean Lanier to talk about it. This code provision has been tried to put in at the national level for at least 2 cycles. That's 6 or 7 years. And it did get into the 2012 IRC. And what this says is that if you have what's called light frame wood construction, and that's trusses or truss joists, TJIs, that those types of floor systems have the capability for failure much earlier than a sound sawed wood floor. So what got put into the 2012 code based on the fact that there was a fire death of a firefighter that went through a floor in Michigan when this started, that the code required the installation of a layer of at least either 1/2 inch sheetrock or 5/8 inch OSB to protect that light frame wood construction. This is not a true 1 hour assembly. It is simply put in for not only firefighter protection in case of fire, but also to be able to escape out of a house. It gives you just a little bit more time. There's a calculated requirement for a 1/2 inch sheetrock on a wall, and that's 20 minutes. And if you put it horizontally, I suspect it's going to be less than that. But the code change in the 2015 code made it clear that it's not a true 1 hour assembly because you can still penetrate it with electrical boxes, with ductwork, speaker boxes. You can still have these penetrations because it's not a true 1 hour assembly. When we were going through this with the Home Builders Association was back in April, and this was after the the individual that had the fire death in Brandon that went through the floor. So with that, I've told the home builders that if they intend to keep this as a local amendment, they need to come here and plead their case. So with that, I've got Cully Liebert, president of the Sioux Empire Home Builders Association. And what we're looking at for is a consensus as to where we're going to go with this.
Well, thanks, Ron. I really appreciate you guys allowing us to come here and talk to you guys today. What's that? I will. My name is Cully Liebert. I am the current president of the Sioux Empire Home Builders here in Sioux Falls. As many of you already know, the Home Builders has a long-standing relationship with the city and the Building Services Department, and we really appreciate the opportunity to be involved in this process. As a third-generation home builder, I understand the importance of building codes and the continuation of updating them to better allow people to be safe in their homes, not only homeowners but tenants. As we all know, fire protection is of great importance when we're trying to keep families safe in their homes. And we at the Home Builders have supported a lot of different code changes over the years, including smoke alarms, carbon monoxide alarms, escape and rescue openings like egress windows, arc fault circuit interrupters, and fire-resistant construction practices that we do on a daily basis. Over the past months, our Codes Committee has met with Ron Bell to review the code updates coming forward. After long discussions at the Home Builders, we feel that the provision to put the drywall on the ceiling really creates a false sense of security for the homeowners and also fire protection or fire safety rescue people. While this code thrives to make the homes safer, it also does add cost. It is unavoidable that we are going to be putting penetrations through this ceiling to allow for mechanical systems, wiring, plumbing, whatever it may be. And under this code, as the way it's written, those penetrations are not going to have to be sealed. So we are creating some false sense of security when putting holes in that ceiling, because we're not going to stop all that fire from getting through there. While it does strive to make a house safer, it does add cost to a home. And although we would never put a price on human lives, we do have a big concern about keeping housing affordable. The Home Builders Association estimates the cost of this code change would be around $2 a square foot, which in layman's terms is $2,000 to $3,000 for an average sized home. According to the National Association of Home Builders, in the Sioux Falls market, for every $1,000 of cost that we add to a home, we price out 283 potential homeowners from achieving home ownership. Realizing that the decisions that we make to the building code directly affects lives and affordability, it is important that we base those decisions on sound analytical data. We have yet to find sound analytical data that shows how much time this code provision would provide for families to escape. That being said, the Home Builders Association strongly supports expanded consumer fire safety protection and cost-effective fire protection technologies that are based on sound analytical data. The Home Builders Association is vitally concerned for safety of all homeowners and tenants. We hope to continue to have the opportunity to work with the city and the Building Services Department to come up with cost-effective solutions that are based on sound data. In the end, we are not able to find a solution to this issue. Therefore, we would respectfully ask that you continue to amend this out of the new code. On behalf of the Home Builders, I would like to thank you all for just letting us come and speak, and we really appreciate you listening to our input. And I would answer any questions that you may have on this particular issue.
Questions from the council? Councilor from Bach?
I do have a question. I think I need to ask Ron first, though, about this specific topic. And maybe you can help me too, though, but this idea, I get what the amendment is trying to do, but if the amendment doesn't say that those holes have to be sealed, then what's the solution? what is the proposed, what is the IRC saying would be the right way to do this to really achieve the safety that they're trying to?
It wasn't an amendment. It was a clarification at the national level to make it clear that this isn't a real true 1-hour assembly. A true 1-hour assembly on a wood truss is either 2 layers of 5/8 type X on the bottom cord or a resilient channel with a type C, a 3rd generation fire core sheetrock, and it's the entire assembly. If you penetrate into that with a plastic pipe, that's a combustible penetration, but there are intumescent fire system devices that you put onto that. If there's a fire that activates that intumescent device, it chars and it closes up the opening. It's not intended to be a 1-hour. It's simply intended to provide a membrane on that only the light frame wood construction to provide better fire safety for people to get out or better fire safety for a firefighter in a fire situation from accessing inside a fire situation.
So can we put it in real speak then? Let's talk about, I have vents for my furnace in the floor in my living room, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so say I'm under this construction.
You can have it. You can have it with this.
I could have a vent for my furnace there.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
But it's not safe unless I do what you just said, something about make it close up if there's a fire, right?
It's not
as safe, sorry.
As safe. If you have like an apartment, all apartment floor systems and walls are required to be fire resistant construction. And if you had an apartment with a floor system in there, you would have to have this type of sheetrock and those types of additional aspects in order to maintain the true fire resistant construction. This is not. This is just simply putting up a membrane on the bottom cord where there is a higher likelihood of a floor failure because of the light frame wood trusses. In a fire situation, the fire is going to heat up the metal gusset plates, and that just simply goes right into the wood. Once the metal gusset plates are gone, you're going to have a structural failure with the truss.
Then one more, if I might, Mr. Chair. Can you, either one of you, define for me what's the difference between light construction and what would be heavier construction? Give me an example.
Well, years ago when I started, everything was 2x10s, 2x12s. Nowadays, it is wood trusses, which are flat 2x4s with metal gusset plates with web members all over the place, or it's a truss joist or a TJI, and that's probably, I'd say 80% of the construction in town is using wood trusses nowadays. The other thing is what's called a truss joist or TJI, which is, it's like a wood I-beam where it's got wood at a flange on the bottom with a plywood web. And that's probably 10% of the construction here in town. So you're really talking about 80 to 90% of the houses that are built that this would affect.
Councilor Erickson.
Okay, my question, kind of piggybacking off of that, is I don't want to sound naive to this. We just built a house. And so are you talking only about unfinished basements, or are you talking about full finished basements, that it's a new thing that's going to be required? Or are we only talking about unfinished basements?
If you finish your basement, you got a layer of sheetrock that's up there, so that doesn't apply at all. This is only dealing with where you would have that exposed wood framing in typically an unfinished basement. Now the problem is that these membranes are put up, but next year, 10 years, whatever, whenever the home builder wants to come back and finish the basement, they got to take it all down in order to get the electrical systems in, the duct systems, the plumbing systems that are in there. So that was a discussion that we had in 2012 in order to make the decision to simply amend it out. And also, I always have this concern about what I call yo-yo effects. It's in the code one cycle and it's gone the next, but it's here to stay.
Okay, a couple of follow-up questions then. If, for example, my basement's not finished, and so if I had to add an extra $2,000 to $3,000 for my house, that's certainly going to be additional square footage that I'm not going to be able to afford to do. I only can go so far. And so then now I'm going to have to make it smaller, you know, poor me, but I'm just saying that is what goes into the affordable housing. There's requirements now that you have to have the outside walls framed and insulated, and that goes into the cost as well as you're purchasing and building a home. That adds into the bottom line of we might not finish our basement for a couple years.
Right.
So my question is, when I take down the sheetrock, say it's required, I take down that sheetrock, can that be reused? Or is there an additional cost to that? Because now I had to pay $3,000 to have that put up. If this were to go through, I'm saying, you put it up, $3,000. Okay, now I'm going to finish my basement. I have additional costs and labor now to take it down because I can't probably reuse it because I've got to put all my plumbing, my electrical, everything in there that I kind of, for me, it may be 2 years. For somebody else, it might be 1 year, 10 years. Right. You just don't know how long it's going to take until you finish it, and oftentimes people will build a little bit bigger up top. So is there, I'm assuming there's an additional cost to take it down, and then are we just garbaging that?
I mean, in my professional opinion, I think a biggest share of it would probably be garbage. I think there would probably be some salvage to some of it. But I think there's definitely going to be cost no matter what. Obviously, you got the cost up front, you've got the cost of somebody taking it down, and you're going to have the cost of replacing some of it and putting it up new. So, you know, I really think that it's probably going to affect, you know, the lower priced homes, obviously, because when you get into a certain level, then they probably are already finishing that lower level anyway, more than likely. So we're really talking about a good share of homes, because we build a lot of homes in that price range, and they don't finish that basement, and that's would be a concern is, you know, how much more are we, who are we pricing out of the market that would be out there buying a home and doing it. So, you know, and not trying to put safety on the back burner. Obviously, that is a concern for everybody, but I think there's a point where we need to be cognizant of what we're doing and how much are we getting for what we're spending. So
2 more questions, if I may. Well, one's the last is a statement, but my first question, you're talking about hard evidence. How many homes are built annually over we can look at a 5-year period. How many homes are built and how many times has this been impacted? I mean, do
you
we
mean
have
as far as how many houses we build in the city annually?
Right, or even in the United States. I mean, I don't want to put a number on somebody's life. That's not fair to do.
Right.
But I'm just curious, the statistics of, in the United States, we build X number of homes, and twice this has been an issue,
you know,
or I don't know.
I don't know that specific number or statistic, but I would guess it's a fairly low number, but I'm sure there's information out there as to fires that have happened where the floor has failed, and you know, that's probably where this is coming from, obviously.
Right.
I think in the city of Sioux Falls, we probably haven't seen that very low number of that happening, so not that we are, you know, exempt from that, but...
And my final statement I'll say is, as a client or you're building my home, nothing right now is stopping me from doing this. I can have you put this in if you're sitting down and you're saying to me, okay, Miss Homeowner, you know, here's something that has been brought up. Mm-hmm. Is this something you would like to do in your house? Right. And we can make that decision between the customer and the builder without it being a requirement.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there it would be, you know, whether it's the builder educating their customer or the customer knowing about this and what's going on and requesting that. You can do whatever you want.
Right.
It's your house. So, but, you know, mandating that, it will definitely put some cost there. So,
Councilor Karski.
First of all, respected Mr. Lanier here and the fire department and all that they do for our citizens in our community. It's a tough job when the fire's building or the burning's building.
Yep.
The building is burning and you got to run in there when everybody else is running out. So appreciate the work they do, and not to put, like you said, what is the price of safety and for that type of people, that type of thing. But I think we were all trying to fish around for a number. How much time, if there's a fire in the basement and there's that barrier there, does it buy 5 minutes? Does it buy an hour?
Yeah, and I don't know that. I mean, I don't know that there's specific data out there that says you're going to get 5 minutes or 10 minutes. There may be, but I don't know we can't find that. We don't know that. I mean, unless you're going to go to an actual 1 hour barrier like Ron was talking about, we don't really know what kind of safety we're going to get. I mean, we do have open stairways and those types of things that are in a home that aren't required. So, what is that? How much are we gaining for what we're doing? And I don't know.
Mr. Bell, do you have
any?
I don't have a number other than the calculated fire resistance of a layer of sheetrock on a wall, which is 20 minutes. It's not the same category for a horizontal. So I'm guessing with all the openings that can be in this, there's a whole other issue here, and that's mechanical rooms. It's very difficult to get, of all the ductwork and all that in there, to get that in. You could be, I would guess that you would be increasing the time to get out by 5 to 10 minutes, easy.
5 or 10 minutes, okay. And along the same line of questioning then, current building code, I believe, for residential requires smoke detectors to be hardwired in and linked, right? So if the one down here goes off, one upstairs is going off. I mean, isn't that a greater sense of security, or I guess, if somebody's home, obviously.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay.
Smoke detectors are the single most important thing that was put into the codes probably in the early 80s and saved countless and countless of lives. And again, those code provisions kept on expanding to just a battery detector, to a wire detector, to if one goes off, they all go off. So those types of systems are in place, along with carbon monoxide detectors too.
Yep, and I love the idea of the carbon monoxide detectors. Thank you. In South Dakota, we're fairly unique, and we have basements. Most other parts of the country don't have basements. Is this, it's an international residential code. Mm-hmm. Is this really intended for areas that maybe have crawl spaces? Is it more effective there?
Yeah, again, you also got to understand that the IRC requires sprinklers in everything, which we don't adopt. But there is a specific provision within this section that says that if you have a crawl space without any type of fuel-fired equipment, you don't need it. That's another exception. If you have anything that could create a fire, like a furnace or water heater or anything like that, that would then require that type of protection. Okay.
I appreciate it. And you mentioned sprinklers. If we were really trying to be safe, we'd require sprinklers, but at what level do we have to stop? So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Any other questions from council? I have just one. Chief Lanier, do you have anything to say on this?
Dean Lanier, Fire Marshal with Sioux Falls Fire Rescue. I appreciate the Home Builders Association and their willingness to talk about the subject with us, as well as being brought into the discussion by our chief building official. As the fire marshal for the city of Sioux Falls, I can tell you there are consistently 160 or so fires every single year inside this city. It is a presumption that would be a bad presumption if you think that only occurs in the core areas of our city. It occurs on developments off of 69th and Western, as well as developments off of 57th and Southeastern. So it's non-discriminatory as to the type of impact we see by fire within our city throughout an entire year. If you want to know more about the dynamics of what's going on inside these unprotected basements, I can certainly bring more items and more depth to the discussion, but in coming here today, my first thought was, how deep do you want to go into this? How much understanding and background do you want to get from this? Do you want to know what the burn times are? I can tell you that this is not something new to the fire service. Lightweight construction has been a common practice in the industry since the 90s. So we're not at the front end of this, just to be clear. We're not at the front end of this whole thing, this whole issue. We're more at the end of, now there's been an opportunity to have some research and analysis going on. There are several different reports that have been published that have had 9-year studies associated with them. So it's not a decision you have to make based on what you feel. If you want the analysis, I can certainly provide you the depth and scope of the details. It's just a question of what do you want to see and how deep do you want to go into this subject. So the information is out there. I would tell you the reason why it was brought to ICC and then adopted into the code was because of these analysis and these research efforts that have been made over a 9-year span. So it didn't happen overnight. There's additional information available to you. The question is really how in depth do you want to see this, and what do you want to know? There have been burn studies on this whole subject, so it's not something that is completely void of deeper research analysis.
Councilor Karski.
I guess what I'm wondering is what Mr. Bell is looking for us from here. This is the 3-year review of the IRC. So you're looking for us to accept it as it is or amend it out? Is that the direction we're going here?
We're trying to see a consensus as to where the council would like to go with this. If you feel that it needs to stay in the code, we kind of like to have that information. If you feel that it could be amended out for another 3 years, we'd like that also before we get to first and second reading.
Councilor Rolfing.
Chief Lanier. Sir. You know, it seems to me that the one thing that's come back on this is the fire protection, the reason for this. Give us your opinion, your professional opinion as to whether this is something that should be done, you know, that kind of thing. I guess that's kind of where I'm at.
My professional opinion is that I understand the dynamic between the economics of the decision versus the safety. Lightweight construction was adopted as a means of cost savings within single family and 1 and 2 family home construction. It's been something that's been in progress since the early 90s. After reading the reports and understanding the scope of what can happen, I think this is really when we talk about the minimum level of life safety, we're reaching for minimum level at this point. I know what happens, my expectation is not that people buy a single or dual family home and have an unfinished basement and put absolutely nothing in their basement. That's an unrealistic expectation. So my expectation is that people use their basement that's unfinished for storage. It's not so much the structure, it's what's burning in our basements. And the unprotected structure itself is where the two adjoin to make the problem. So my professional opinion is I would protect it in a minimal way. As a fire service professional, I would be open to any alternative solution that could show the same level of minimum life safety. So I think our mindsets ought to be open to accepting any other alternative. We should be open to technology, maybe offering some new advancements in this area. As of yet, I haven't seen any, but I think we ought to have at least an open mind about accepting alternatives into this whole dynamic.
Councilor Offenbach.
Thank you. I wonder, Ron, are there more areas in this? I mean, we've got a pile of paper here yet to go through. Are there more areas in this one in particular that you need consensus from us on? I'm starting to feel like this is a way bigger issue than what we're ready to tackle today and say, oh yeah, do it or don't. This one in particular, I guess I would like to see, I don't know, deferred for time.
Well, we haven't even got to first or second reading here.
Well, I know, exactly. But you're asking us for consensus, and we're just trying to wrap our heads around something that's really complicated.
Sure.
But I wonder if you want to finish the presentation on this one, and then...
I thought that after meeting with the Home Builders Code Committee, this was the only thing that was out there that there was a disagreement on. So I thought we were good. So, okay, with that... I don't know that we have a whole lot of time.
We move on. There is still a couple other questions.
Okay.
So, Councilor Karski.
Going back to a couple of things that were said, Ron, when you said when you were just a puppy building inspector, the construction method was 2x12 floor joists, basically. You could look up in your ceiling from your basement and you saw these 2x12s. Now when you look up in a new home, they're 2x4s that are webbed together, basically.
Pre-manufactured wood trusses.
Yep. And that has lowered the cost of construction, is what Mr. Lanier said. And the reason we did this was to save money or help people keep homes affordable. Now we're going back and we're adding cost. I mean, we did one to make it cheaper, now we're doing another and we're increasing costs again. It doesn't make sense. So I personally would be for amending it out and keeping it out.
Councilor Kiley.
Well, I certainly can see both sides of the issue here. I mean, because it is going to increase the cost to the homeowner, especially, and maybe be redundant if they later then go in to finish off their basement. And I'm just visualizing our home, which it was a multi-level, and the lower two levels we left unfinished. And then later on, I got the required permits and licenses and did much of that work myself. But visualizing, and that was a combination of 2x12 joists in the lowest level and then the truss in what would be the garden level of the home. And even in the garden level with the truss system, truss joist system, there were still mechanical items that were even below where they couldn't run them through the trusses, much to my dismay, by the way. But anyway, so I could see where just putting up sheetrock itself would be a challenge then when you're working around the mechanicals as well, too, because you'd still have to frame around those in order to do so. Plus, you still have your vents coming through the ceilings because the lower area is still heated regardless. Sure. But at the same time, smoke alarms are great for getting the residents out of the home. But I also want to take into consideration our firefighters who are coming into the home after the residents have evacuated. You know, I want safe conditions for them too. But I want it to be realistic. So if we're talking burn time, we'd have to factor in average response time, because that's now subtracted from the burn time. And just to see just how feasible this is. And I guess I'd like to have a little bit more information on it before we made a recommendation one way or the other.
Okay. Councilman Rolfe.
I just thought of one other thing here, piggybacking off what Councilman Kiley said. You kind of indicated that 5, 10, maybe 15 minutes max would be the difference here. What's the average response time, Chief, to a call for a fire?
Thanks for your question. It is 5 minutes and 12 seconds, which is our 90th percentile for all responses here in the city of Sioux Falls.
So we're right on the edge there of it really making a difference. And if they take 2 or 3 minutes to make the call to the fire department after the fire started, it probably isn't going to make that much difference in the first place.
It's a decision that chief officers weigh heavy on their mind. Yep. I can tell you right up front that there's a decision has to be made pretty quickly. The fire on 6th Street in the 3-story apartment, if you were listening to the first dispatches as well as the first arriving crews, there's almost an immediate decision that has to be made about what we're going to do to try to save lives. It's not an easy picture. I wish I could tell you it was just cut and dry, but it really isn't that simple. Again, I offer my expertise to try to develop more about the issue. If that's what you're searching for, is more context from which to make the decision, we can show you the depth of the research that has been going on and what kind of things have been found out. So again, I would say that there is additional information available. It's just a question of at what point are you comfortable with your decision.
Thank you, Chief. Councilor Erickson.
I would just state again that this is an option that I have as a homeowner. If I want to do it, I can already go ahead and do it. So it wouldn't have to be a mandate. And so I I would lean more towards amending it out, because I do still have that option to put it in, into the unfinished area. And, you know, part of that is it going to be a year? Is it going to be 2 years, 3 years? The option is still there to go ahead and do it and work that out as me, the customer, with my builder. So that's where I would lean.
Thank you. Okay, Councilor Rolfing, we don't.
When they put the sheetrock up, it's not taped or anything like that, it's just straight up. So getting it off shouldn't be that big. Just reverse the drill and unscrew it. And so that, I can't see where you couldn't save a lot of that sheetrock if you're doing it. Take it all down and put it back up afterwards. I know you're going to have some maybe little corners break off or something, but that can be mudded over.
Could I indulge and have Paul Nelson come up from the home builders who build these all the time?
That's it.
Paul Nelson, Nelson Construction. I chaired the Building Codes Committee. And here's the problem with just unscrewing it. Labor is expensive. They're going to charge you more to take it down and reuse it than they're going to charge you to throw it in the dumpster and start over. Because one, when you take it down and you have to frame all your walls, the framer's working around it, electrician's working around it, plumber's working around it, HVAC people are working around it. You tear it down, you throw it out, and you start over. So, and once again, we do not need anybody to die. I mean, our houses, we want safe. So what is the proper way to do it? We don't know. We're willing to work. I go to national home builders meetings, and it's on. I mean, we fight the fire sprinkler system in South Dakota because of cost. We're not fighting them because of safety. We don't want to be unsafe. Nobody wants to build a house and have somebody die in it. So top priority is that. We just feel that this code does not give us what we need. And I can see these hangers throwing it up. You're going to have gaps around the whole walls. Every outlet they're going to cut. If there's 1 inch, I mean, nobody's going to care because they know they're going to tear it down and throw the stuff away. So that false sense of security, one for the homeowner, well, yeah, I got an extra 5 or 10 or 15 minutes. That's, I think, is our hang up on our side, is it's not written proper. So that would be my take.
Thank you, sir. Councilor Kiley.
Just a quick follow-up to Councilor Erickson's question about the homeowner has the option of doing this. How difficult would it be for a homeowner to sign off with their builder that they have been made aware of this option and that they decline?
Well, that could certainly happen, but with all the code requirements that we have out there, there's no way that we're going to keep track of those types of arrangements.
I'm not talking about all the code requirements. I'm talking about just this one.
Yeah, I've never seen anything in the code that would give us the authority to deal with a sign-off by a client to a contract.
No, I'm not saying that it would be code, but we just in an effort to raise awareness for the homeowner. Because it's one thing to say that, well, the homeowner has the option, but it's another, they have to be made aware of that option by their builder.
Yeah, and that might work, but I just can't tell you that would happen on every house from every builder in town.
Okay, thank you. And just to keep this moving along now, if we have any other questions, please email them to Chief Lanier or to Ron Bell, and then we can bring those up during first and second reading on this, because this isn't anything that isn't going to come up at first or second reading. So with that, would you like to continue, please?
Okay, with the interest of moving on here, we'll go over significant changes with the 2015 IBC, and Chapter 5 of the IBC defines how large buildings can be based on area, number of stories, height, whether there's a sprinkler system in there or not. There's a complete rework at the national level. there's really no substantive changes, but they completely changed the tables. Instead of looking at one table, you're now looking at three to look at what the allowable areas are, whether it's sprinklered or not, what the allowable heights are, and what the number of stories are. Healthcare systems, there's new provisions in the code that's where you're talking about assisted living centers and hospitals or nursing homes. There's what's called a group condition 1, which deals with occupants have the capability of evacuation without assistance, and condition 2 requires some assistance during evacuation. And this got interspersed into the codes as to where you have people that don't have the ability or they need help to get out. There's provisions in there for getting less amount of area and other things throughout the code. Structural changes in the IBC, there's a fairly major one that says that any construction for any new construction where there's critical care emergency operations, such as if you build a fire station, a police station, an ambulance station, that you have to have the capability of a tornadic room, a place where somebody can go into in case there's a tornado alert. And then that is also taken on as a requirement for schools. We're at the very north end of the tornadic zone within the central United States. So this is going to be calling for the designer to have the safe location of the people that are within the building in a shelter that's going to be capable of 350-mile-an-hour winds for tornadic activity. Now, a major thing is for schools, and the last school that the Sioux Falls district built that into their school without even a code requirement. So it's not like this is new, but it's happening throughout the country. The next one is horizontal building separations. This is what's called pedestal buildings. It used to be like if you have a wood frame building, you're allowed 4 stories in certain amounts of areas. Well, the codes have changed cycle after cycle to allow you to put a building on top of a pedestal, which is a fire-resistive concrete basement and main level. The Hilton Garden Inn and the CNA building were built on pedestal construction. This really deals with the new development that's going to be on 10th Street, where the hotel and apartments are going to be wood frame construction on top of a parking ramp. What this does, the previous codes only allowed you to go to 1 story in height with that pedestal, then you could put your wood framing above that. This took it out. This just says that you can have as many levels of pedestals as you want, just as long as the height of the building is within allowable heights based on the type of construction that's in there, whether it's wood frame or fire-resistant wood framing. I can tell you that my experience with the legacy codes, I would have never thought any of this would happen, but it's being done throughout the country all over the place. There's a possibility that, depending on how many stories that they go, that they could have a high-rise structure which is more than 75 feet, which previous codes would require to be non-combustible and fire-resistant construction, but they could have a high-rise construction on top of a pedestal as long as they're within the allowable heights, just based on this code provision. There was also provisions on the pedestal that you couldn't have certain types of occupancies, like large assembly occupancies in the pedestal. That's gone too. So this is providing much more design flexibility for the designers across this country. Sprinklers, the only change with sprinklers is that if you put a use, an assembly occupancy, if it's a drinking or dining establishment, on a roof of a building, and you have more than 100, the whole building has to be sprinklered. If you put, again, this development right here, we're going to have thousands of people up on the top of that. This is just saying that if you put that type of occupant load on a roof where you're out in the open, sprinklers don't do anything for you, what you exit through to go down has to be sprinklered. And in this case, this whole thing will be sprinklered anyway. But this is just an example of some of the changes in the codes that really apply to the type of construction and the type of projects that we're seeing here in Sioux Falls. Accessibility. We do not enforce the Americans with Disabilities Act. That's enforced through the Department of Justice. but the code scopes out in Chapter 11 what has to be accessible. Then there's the ANSI A117.1 standards, which mirror ADA. Well, the changes to the ADA are now incorporated into Chapter 11 and into the ANSI A117.1. The biggest change is for recreational facilities like fishing piers or bowling alleys or whatever, that what's been expanded in ADA will meet the same provisions that's what's in the building code. So with that, I'm going to try to move on as fast as I can with the time period. The International Existing Building Code is the next code, and this was promulgated in 2003, and it's always been an option to either the designer or the official as to whether you want to use this document or not. What they've done is that they've taken out Chapter 34 of the building code, which was you could meet the building code requirements for remodeling and renovations and additions, but now they've taken it out and now they mandated that the existing building code be used as the scoping or design standard for any remodels, renovations, additions, historic buildings, those types of renovations. So they took out Chapter 34 of the building code to make this a requirement here. A new change in the existing building code will deal with window fall capabilities. It used to be that if you replaced a window in an existing use, you just simply replace the window. But this will go further to say that if you replace a window that is within 24 inches in residential or 36 inches of apartment, that you have to have these window stop devices such that the window doesn't open more than 4 inches, such that a child cannot fall out. But these stop devices are such that if you don't have any children, all you do is flick them and you can open up the window wide open. So this will be a new requirement for window replacements to make sure that they have the same code requirements as new construction for window fall protection. 804.22 fire protection group R occupancies. We had a fire in an apartment on south of 49th Street, and they basically gutted the whole thing, and the current existing building code said that you don't need to sprinkle it if you're not more than 3 stories in height. They didn't sprinkle it. This has taken up the slack with this. This is saying that if your work area is more than 50% of the floor area, then you're going to end up having to sprinkle it consistent with the building code. So they really strengthen the requirements for sprinkling where you're dealing with renovations and remodels. Another thing that I did is in the IEBC that we had a whole section in our local ordinance that deals with moved structures. That was in the ordinance section of the building code, and because there's a specific section in the IEBC that I relocated that from the building code ordinance section into the existing building code section. All the same, it just got properly located. As far as the mechanical code and fuel gas code, these are codes for heating, ventilation, air conditioning contractors. Every item that was changed, which is this book, was reviewed by our Mechanical Board of Appeals, and they got rid of a couple local amendments that they just haven't been using and so forth, but they had really good discussions. As far as significance in both of those is there's what's called American Society of Heating and Refrigeration Contractors. It's called ASHRAE standards. Those are national consensus standards that get brought up to date for mechanical engineers. The mechanical code has brought those into light to make sure that the contractors and designers are using the most up-to-date design standards for heating, ventilation, and air conditioning systems. There was another long discussion with what's called whole house ventilation to make sure that you got some air movement inside of apartments. This was put into effect with the 2012 codes for both residential and apartments. And we had some issues with that as far as bringing in outside air in the wintertime to get the moisture and that type of issues out. And what they did is they kind of piggybacked some of the code requirements in Minnesota and also got backdraft dampers to try to take care of that type of cold type of situation. And the last code is the property maintenance code. That is not a construction code, but it's a maintenance code that our property maintenance division utilizes for making sure that properties are maintained properly. One thing in this was that we took a look at the language for making sure that cultivated flowers in gardens are not considered as nuisance weeds and grass, which is part of the property maintenance code. And I think there's discussions going on with ordinances between public works and planning to deal with that type of issue, but we changed that. We also modified the code locally to require handrails on 4 or more risers consistent with the residential code. The property maintenance code is 5 or more, but our inspectors wanted to utilize the same standard for new construction or renovations or remodels. So that's a whole lot, but there's a whole lot to this. So I'm glad to have the opportunity to come here before we just have first and second reading, where I'm sure that you guys can be at least overwhelmed with some of these things that we've been working on for the last year. But hopefully we're looking for first and second readings. I'm hoping in December, and subject to approval from the council, the actual effective dates for this would be for permits issued after May 1st.
Thank you very much, Ron. Councilman Rolfing?
Yeah, I have one thing as you were going through that. On the IEBC 804-2-2 fire protection on the sprinkler systems, explain sprinklers are now required where a work area exceeds 50% of floor area. What do you mean by that?
Okay, that's all code jargon. I mean, there's certain provisions that you have to do depending on how large the scope of the project is. And what this is dealing with, that if you have a building where you're gutting and redoing more than 50%, there's more provisions that have to be done as compared to work area of less than 50% or just remodels or renovations. Because you're in that more than 50%, that's what's called a class 3 or whatever, that kicks in certain things. In this case, if that fire in that apartment created a work area more than 50%, what that does is require sprinklers in accordance with the current building code. There was a previous provision in the 2012 and previous codes that said that you'd only have to sprinkle it if it was 4 stories or more. So if you're doing that much work in a building, and my irony here is that the building caught fire. I mean, it lost an entire roof and a top floor, and I was really surprised that they didn't consider sprinklers, but because the code said that they didn't have to, they didn't sprinkle it. The 2015 code will now require that.
So it won't require it for newly constructed if it's 4 floors or less?
No. If it's newly constructed, that's under the building code, and what we have for apartments is 6 or more units that require
That's the way we
sprinkler
wrote that,
systems.
6 or more units.
Yep.
Okay. But if something happens and a fire starts and they have to remodel or fix up 50% or more, then they're going to be
Then it
required
kicks
to
it
put
in.
it in.
If it's less than 50%, it doesn't kick in. So it has to be a substantial project to say that you got to retroactively come back and put in the fire protection that is the most current standard.
Right. Just wanted to make sure I understood that one.
Councilor Kiley?
Thank you for the revisions to the window opening control devices for fall protection. I'm glad to see that. We had a few unfortunate incidents that you were involved in here in recent months, and so I think that's a great change.
Yeah, what happened with that was we did have a local amendment with the Home Builders Association that simply reduced the threshold height from 24 inches down to 18 inches, which is the threshold height when you start needing tempered glass and so forth. But at the building code at the national level, they changed it from that to 36 inches, relocated it in a different section of the code that I missed. So So after that incident, we had to go back. We found out that the code actually says 36 inches or less, and we put window devices on all those permits that we hadn't finalized out yet. So what I'm doing with this is just saying directly what's in the code, and that's apartments 36 inches, residential 24 inches for window fall protection devices.
Any other questions from the council at this time? Ron and Dean, I want to thank you and ask you before we do first and second reading, to sort of keep yourselves open. Maybe councilors asking to meet with you to discuss these over further. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other items that the council would like to bring up at this time? Councilor Karski.
Just a question for Councilor Staggers. Who's older, you or South Dakota?
Oh, no.
Who's wiser?
I thought he was going to say you or me.
Well, thank you, Councilor Karski, for making us aware it is Councilor Staggers' birthday. Happy birthday, Councilor Staggers.
Well, thank you very much, Kenny.
With that being said, this informational meeting is now